What is up, everybody? It's Brian with mtmmix.com. It's been a really long time since I put out a video. I planned on taking a break. I didn't plan on the break being this long, but besides the fact it's been a great break, I got a lot done. I caught up on a lot of mixes, and I'm just keeping that going, so I'm being consistent as possible. So today we're going to be discussing a Slate Digital vocal chain, what I like to do with my vocals when I'm using the Slate Digital platform, the virtual mix rack. It's awesome. You guys know I've talked about it before. Probably one of my favorite companies as far as plugins goes. Definitely check it out if you don't have it already. Hopefully you guys will enjoy what you see in this video. Maybe you guys could check out the bundle. They have a lot of different pricing options. I'm not being paid to say this. But anyway, I'm gonna go into my vocal chain. This is what I did on a lot of Skyzoo's records for his last album, in celebration of us. So without further ado, let's hop on the screen and I'll show you my signal chain. So here we are, we got the session up. It is Forever in a Day. This is the Skyzoo record off of In Celebration of Us album that he just released. Dope album. If you haven't heard it yet, definitely check it out. Alright, but anyway, we're going to dive into his verse vocals. I'm going to play the beginning of it for you right now. This is just going to be an example of what it sounds like. This is with the virtual mix rack signal chain on there. One thing to point out is this isn't the full vocal chain that I use for his vocals. You can see here that I'm sending it to a Vox bus, a vocal bus, which has an additional set of plugins. Some of them are inactive just because they were jumping between different studios, but this is the final output of his record. So I'm going to play it for you right now. Just take a listen.
Infinitely caught in a weave of trying to dip around what they breathe before you leave, or climbing in and out of a scene they call elite, or lining up whoever's between the world and me, or me and the world, whichever first when pronouncing it. Taught us get enough for us all if you come out with it. The background eat till it's gone if you all around with it.
Alright, so let's dive into what exactly I did. Let's open up the plugin. So this is my generally go-to sort of signal chain for Sky. Every time I have a record, I'll generally go to this sort of the same chain as far as what modules I'm using, but the settings will vary depending on the record to kind of make it match the beat. So let's dive into the first thing that I'm using. This is an FG73. This is a preamp essentially. It's an emulation. So what I like to do with this is just sort of add some body, some sort of, I don't want to say distorted, but it brings out some harmonics in the vocals, lower harmonics when you bring this virtual drive up. So I boosted it all the way up to 54.4 roughly. You could see a little indicator light right here. It's not always too accurate. The only time you really see that thing flashing is when you have it way up here. But at the same time, that does introduce some cool properties into the vocals. I'm going to do it for you right now so you can see what I'm talking about. So let me just hit play and I'll boost that.
Infinitely caught in a weave of trying to dip around what they breathe before you leave, or climbing in and out of a scene they call elite, or lining up whoever's between the world and me, or me and the world, whichever first when pronounced.
So you can see that it adds a lot of distorted harmonics, and it really does give it a cool tone if that's the tone you're looking for. But in this case, I just wanted to add a little bit, something that you probably don't even hear, but it does add a little bit of body to the vocals. So that's what I use the FG73 for. The next thing that I go over to is the FGS, which is an EQ. This is it's pretty similar to just an SSL EQ. And what I do with this guy is I do some of my subtractive EQs. So you can see here that I'm cutting out the lows around 85 hertz, and that's just a standard shelf. Then I go over to this. I turn this guy on. You could switch between just the low filter, sort of like a cutoff, or you can make it a bell curve. I decided to turn it on to a bell curve, and around 450 hertz, I am getting rid of about a decibel of gain. It's something very subtle, just kind of get rid of some of that boxiness. And then I go ahead and reinforce that at 300 hertz. I'm getting rid of 1.24 decibels with a pretty narrow Q. You're able to adjust the Q on the low mids and the high mids. You're not able to do that on the high filter and the low filter. So it's just one thing to pay attention to. Then over here on the high mid filter, I have 730 13 hertz, and that's being subtracted 1.73. So you can see that everything is very subtle on this. You don't want to get rid of the characteristics of a vocal. A lot of people, when they're doing subtractive EQ, will EQ to the point where it doesn't even sound like the artist anymore, and when you're doing that, you're not doing the job right. So make sure that these are all subtle adjustments. Try to tame things down using your compressor. Generally, you will get a better sound that way. So I'm going to go ahead, turn these guys off, and I'm going to start with this bypassed, and then I'll turn it on so you could hear the tonal differences.
Infinitely caught in a weave of trying to dip around what they breathe before you leave, or climbing in and out of a scene they call elite, or lining up whoever's between the world and me, or me and the world, whichever first when pronouncing it. Taught us get enough for us all if you come out with it. The background.
Cool, so you can hear a difference. There is still some EQ going on, but in that later down in that vocal bus, but for the most part, that subtractive EQ is gone, and it is reflected in that. It's a very subtle difference. It's hard to hear it. Don't get frustrated if you can't hear it, but it is there. The next thing that I like to throw on is my FG Stress. This is the classic Empirical Labs Distressor emulation, one of my favorite plugins ever of all time. I think it does a really good job of controlling vocals that have to be compressed fast and released fast. So you can see here that I have it's basically just 4 settings. You have your input, attack, release, and output. This is very similar to, say, for example, this 76, LA76 compressor. So you want to set that input to reflect your gain reduction that is reflected on these LED lights right here. So I have a 4:1 ratio, and I'm going to start with this turned off. I'm going to turn it on, and then you guys will be able to see the difference there.
Infinitely caught in a weave of trying to dip around what they breathe before you leave, or climbing in and out of a scene they call elite, or lining up whoever's between the world and me, or me and the world, whichever first when pronouncing it. Taught us get enough for us all.
So this is a pretty clear difference to me. It brings the vocal to the front, adds some grit and body to the vocal as well, which is probably my favorite part about the plugin. It's sort of, if you had to pick one plugin to put on a vocal, I would choose this guy. So definitely check this FG Stress. It's, again, emulation of the Empirical Labs Distressor, probably one of the most infamous compressors of all time. So we're going to go over here. This is the last guy. This is another EQ. It's a FGN, as Slate Digital calls it. What I do here is my additive EQ. You can see that I boosted the highs about 2.5 decibels, and that's just to really push the vocal to the front of the mix, even more so than it already is. And then I also boosted some of those lows to add some body back into the mix. Again, 2.5 decibels at 402 hertz. This added a little bit of body to the mix. So I'm going to go ahead, start with it off, and I'll turn it on. You guys can take a listen.
Infinitely caught in a weave of trying to dip around what they breathe before you leave, or climbing in and out of a scene they call elite, or lining up whoever's between the world and me, or me and the world, whichever first when pronouncing it. Taught us get enough for us all if you come out with it. The background eat till it's gone if you all around with it.
And that's that, guys. This is my go-to signal chain for Skyzoo, for a lot of artists, sort of the boom bap kind of gritty street rap, the stuff that I generally prefer to mix. And I spent a lot of time on creating this, and I think it does a great job getting the vocal to where it has to be. Again, this is the final signal chain that ended up going onto the album, got printed onto the album, so that's definitely cool to see. I'm going to be creating that course that I mentioned a while back. It's going to go into this record, a couple of the other records from the album, and it's going to really dive in deep to everything that you see in the session. So you're going to have the virtual mix rack, you're going to have his background vocals, you're going to have his hook, what I did on the hooks. You can see I have 2 virtual mix racks and the Pro Q2. We'll go into what I have on the vocal bus as far as my de-esser, another EQ, some CLA2, some reverb, delays, and then parallel compression, and then just dive into the mix of the beat as well. So the whole idea of what's going to be going on with that is you guys are going to have all the stems available to you for download, so you can just download those stems, follow along with what I'm doing on the mix, and you'll be able to mix a Skyzoo record, which is pretty dope. So if you guys have any questions about this tutorial regarding the virtual mix rack, please don't hesitate to leave it in the comments. It's been a while since I've been back, so I'm excited to answer your guys' questions. And until next time, guys, I'll talk to you soon.
Infinitely caught in a weave of trying to dip around what they breathe before you leave, or climbing in and out of a scene they call elite, or lining up whoever's between the world and me and the world, whichever first when pronouncing it. Taught us get enough for us all if you come out with it. The background eat till it's gone if you all around with it. Try and get a piece off the corner like caught an ounce in it. Caught up in the bounce of it. Well, loyalty is all that it ought to be, like if I was to call and see if you down.